Today we're going to cover the first variable in exposure and begin to learn about what the rule of reciprocity is. ISO. We will learn what it is, why it's important, and how to set it on our cameras. Important concepts and vocabulary for this lesson are ISO, film speed, stop, reciprocity, and the reminder that in photography big numbers mean small things and small numbers mean big things. ISO stands for International Standards Organization, and depending on how old your camera is, it may say ASA or DIN in the really old ones. You can either say the acronym ISO or pronounce it ISO, and both are technically correct and the subject of some debate in my own home. This is a made-up system, but it's a system built upon some very logical ideas and concepts. The first is that film is measured by how much light it needs, and some people got together and gave numbers to that. This is the ISO number. This ISO number is on the film itself, as in 400 speed film. It is the first step in setting your camera. We tell our camera what type of film we are using, essentially how much light we will need based on the ISO, and then your camera will tell you how to adjust your settings and expose our images correctly. To review the chart of this system, we use the chart to understand how all of it works together. Each number listed is considered a standard measure, or a stop within the variable. So the four variables, ISO, f-stop, shutter speed. These are the numbers that are found on our cameras and film. Let's take a closer look at the ISO numbers. The foundation of the exposure system is based on standard stops, or agreed upon increments of value for each variable. You can see easily that the numbers assigned to ISO double as they increase. These are arbitrary numbers assigned to sensitivity values determined by a group of people. Bottom line, they can mean anything and that the ISO people want them to. What was agreed upon, though, is that each number that doubles also doubles the sensitivity. So these numbers make sense. 200 is twice as sensitive as 100, 400 is 4 times as sensitive as 100, and so on. The higher the number, the less light is required to expose it correctly. For visual demonstration, let's pretend a 32-ounce container is our 100 speed film, and the water coming out of the faucet represents the light coming in through your camera lens. Right? So filling the container with water is like exposing the film. By that rule, the 200 speed film would only need 16 ounces of water because it's twice as sensitive, therefore only needing half the water. 400 is twice as sensitive as that and would require half of that, and so on. Watch again this terrible animation I made to illustrate it. There are other things to be observed about this demonstration, like how long it takes to fill each container, but that's getting too far ahead. This doubling the sensitivity for each standard stop is the foundation of the rule of reciprocity. Actually, this works for every standard stop in the variables in the chart. This is the system of exposure. Let's go back because I'm afraid I lost you. Here's the chart. We looked at the ISO numbers and learned that 200 is twice as fast or 2 times as sensitive as 100. These are standard ISO stops. Remembering that a stop is the basic increment, each of the stops for f-stop and shutter speed also follow that twice as much rule as well. So looking at this chart, we see that 400 is twice as sensitive as 200. So 400 needs half as much light. So by the same logic, 200 needs twice as much light here. So the chart moves from top to bottom, meaning needing the most light at the top of the chart towards the least amount of light at the bottom of the chart. Since in math the number 2 and 1/2 are reciprocal numbers, this is named the rule of reciprocity. Reciprocity. And it is what the whole system is based upon. And it works across the other variables as well. The chart represents our camera. and film settings, and the standard increments built into them. But not luminosity, because it's unofficial and I made that one up. But by this rule, big numbers mean the smallest things, and that's a really handy thing to remember as we move on. It's a lot of information. Let's break it down to what we need to do with the ISO. What does the theory actually mean for us? A photographer chooses a film based on the conditions he or she is going to shoot. We have to commit to an entire roll of film with the same ISO. In our class, we use 400 speed film. It allows us to shoot both outside and indoors under bright conditions. It gives us the greatest chances of shooting good photos in a lot of situations. Our cameras have a device inside that measures the light and helps us set the f-stop and shutter speeds correctly. We have to tell our cameras how much light is needed, then how much light our film needs. So the ISO of our film. This will help us set our cameras easily and take perfect photos every time. Since we only use 400 speed film, we only need really to set the light meter one time and almost then forget about it. If we were digital photographers using DSLRs, we would spend much more time talking about ISO and the power it has in adjusting our exposures. So this is actually one of the only instances where film might be simpler than digital. With an older camera, the setting for ISO is often near the shutter speeds or on the film rewind knob. While it's often a setting that requires two steps like lift and twist or press a button and turn, ISO is the only 400 you should find on your camera. Once it's set, we're ready for everything we will do in this class. A lot of newer cameras will automatically read the film and set the ISO automatically. If you don't see an ISO setting on the top of the camera, look inside the body for these silver buttons that you see here on the right. They create a circuit with the pattern painted on the film canister, and then your camera knows what's filmed inside, what film is inside. By setting the ISO, we've just set one of the variables, and by doing that, it makes it easier to read our cameras and lets the camera do its job for us with the light meter. We also learned a bit more about how exposure works. The rule of reciprocity in its number form seems confusing. We just need to remember that by moving in one direction, we double the amount of light, and moving in the other, we cut it in half, and that works across all three of our variables. But not luminosity, since I made that one up. But it's unofficial, just not unimportant, and we're going to talk about luminosity next time.